Hello everybody, we are going to continue our conversation on the economy of Botswana. So in the first video we talked about some of the data that shows that Botswana has been relatively successful in economic performance among African countries, but also compared to other economies beyond Africa. So in this video, the main purpose is that we are going to cover some of the explanations I know about why Botswana has been successful. I'm going to list some of these explanations. I'm going to talk about them, and there are other explanations, I'm sure. So this is not everything there is about why Botswana has been successful. So the first explanation is going to be related to leadership. The second is going to be related to rational politics. The third one, which I'm going to combine two explanations here, property rights and movable assets. The other one is going to be, well, a combination of all of them. And there are other explanations that I'm not going to cover here, but are related, for example, to conflict, right? There has been limited conflict in the country historically. Also, Botswana has a relatively small population that also needs to be taken into account. And of course, there are some challenges that Botswana is facing. The AIDS crisis is one of them. It's getting better. In the past years, it has improved. But Botswana has been affected really hard by AIDS. And also there is some discussion on issues related to extreme poverty in certain areas. There are some discussion on income inequality. I'm not gonna talk about those. I'm gonna talk about those who I am more familiar with. So the first one is related to leadership. So I had a chance to do research in Botswana several years ago. And one of the things that I found very interesting was the explanation of people who told me that the very good performance of Botswana was due to the leadership of Seretse Khama. So Seretse Khama was the first president of Botswana, and it has a very interesting personal story, which is described in one of the movies called United Kingdom. So I have the link to that to the trailer of the movie here, and the movie is about Botswana and the personal story of Seretse Khama. So to sum up, Seretse Khama seems to have been a very honest man, very honest, and also very very respectful of the law. He was understanding. He had a good understanding of the laws of Botswana, but also the Occidental way of living. He had the chance to study in England, and so he was well-rounded. He was committed to Botswana, and probably he set up this kind of path of low corruption. He had a very important pedigree among the Botswana chiefdoms. So he was educated with the purpose to become the chief of one of the main tribes in Botswana. And I recommend that you watch the movie because it tells the story of how he was very important at promoting democracy in Botswana. And that led to the creation of his political party, and he became the first president. So it seems like he was very important at setting up a trajectory of low corruption and very good governance. So this is the first explanation, Seretse Khama. The other explanation is what we call rational politics. And rational politics has to do with the interests that politicians face in Botswana. And according to this explanation, the politicians in Botswana have very, very high stakes in the development of the country. In particular, they owned one of the main assets in the Botswana economy before they discovered diamonds in the 1960s. So before the 1960s, and to this day, to some extent, the important asset in the economy was cattle. So cattle was exported, was sold, and was a very important source of revenues for the country. But the interesting thing is that there is evidence that the government members of Botswana have stakes in the cattle industry. They own cattle. So it was in their interest to promote policies that benefit cattle production. And since many Botswana people own cattle, by promoting their own interests, they were also promoting the interests of the country. So it was kind of there was an overlapping of interests between the members of the interests of the members of the government. They also have interest in the private sector, right? So there was an overlapping between private sector and government sector, and that was important for the policies that were promoted. For example, good infrastructure, maybe also taxes, and also fiscal policies. So that probably has to do with that. So also going back to Seretse Khama, it was important to mention, and we talked about it before, that Botswana managed to save their revenues, and they have very strict policies of government programs to implement. They implemented programs when there was like a very strict test that these programs had to pass. So by passing, when they passed this, they were approved, then the money was spent. But it was not easy to get approved. There were certain criteria that these programs had to comply with in order to be implemented. So that's a very important point. Okay, so the other explanation is related to property rights and movable assets. And here I'm combining two theories. So the property rights explanation is based on the idea that from a very long time, cattle has been important in the Botswana economy, and not just the economy, by the way of living in the country, the way of life in the country. And this has been described by anthropologists who have done very important work in Botswana. There was an anthropologist, last name is Chapera. He was a very, very important anthropologist trying to describe the laws and customs of the country. And basically he talks about how important cattle was in the country. And the idea is that there were like private property rights on cattle, individual property rights on cattle, which was different from property rights on land. So it seems like historically land has been managed communally, but cattle has been managed individually in a kind of an individual property rights system. So it's being argued that because of this tradition of private property rights in cattle, the economy has embraced property rights and respect of property rights, which is very important for a well-functioning market. So the institution, if there are like good institutions, there is going to be a good market system, and therefore there's going to be prosperity. So without these institutions of property rights, for example, then we cannot have a well-functioning economy. And tied to the property rights, you need to have like a system, a justice system that works well to solve conflict among business people, for example. So when there is this kind of a property rights system working well, the economy is going to work well. So that's kind of the spirit of this explanation. The other explanation is what we call the movable assets, and this was suggested to me by one scholar who was at the time advising the Ministry of Finance or Economics, Clark Leith. He was at the time at the University of Western Ontario, but was working in Botswana. And he said that there is something historically also important about cattle, which is that cattle is a movable asset. So if governments or chiefs want to tax cattle, then it is possible that that cattle is going to move to other places. It's going to move to other countries, to other territories, right? Like if the local chief is overtaxing cattle, are just going to move and go away from the location, right? So that's one of the characteristics of cattle, which is different from other assets. For example, cocoa production, right, which was and is still very important in countries like Ghana in West Africa. In those cases, Ghana, in those cases, if there was like an overtaxation of these assets, kind of a abusing of the power of taxation by local authorities, then the proprietors of these plants, the cocoa plants, cannot go anywhere. So they are more kind of vulnerable to this kind of exploitation by local authorities. So that's kind of the spirit of this idea of movable assets. And probably this to this date that has kind of created this kind of culture of taxation that either is kind of relatively low or is responsible, in the sense that taxes that are collected are going to be invested in services, public services that are going to be useful for people and society. So this idea of movable assets that can be also important for the behavior of the tax authority. Okay, so I think these are the main explanations that I know of. Of course, this is just touching the surface of this. This is a fascinating topic. Many researchers have done work in Botswana, and this is kind of an evolving field, right? Like we are kind of constantly learning new things about the history of this country and trying to understand this country, like any other country basically. But Botswana has called a lot of attention because of this extraordinary performance. So yeah, just gonna finish saying that how beautiful this country is. I mean, it's fascinating. Its economy is fascinating. Its governance is fascinating. But the beauty of the place is as fascinating as the social and economic aspects of it. So I just want to take advantage and say thank you to the people of Botswana and the government of Botswana that treated us very nicely when we were doing research in this beautiful country. So we stop here and we will continue in our next video. Thank you.